Abandoned in the deadly terrain, Nova opened her eyes to a sky filled with nothing but red and orange. The air was thick with the smell of burning plants and something far more sinister. She tried to sit up, but felt an overwhelming weight on her chest. The ground beneath her was cracked and uneven, with strange glowing fissures crisscrossing the surface. Her head throbbed with pain. She could barely remember how she had gotten here. All she knew was that she had been left alone on a planet that no one would ever want to visit, a place that had only one rule: survive or die. The cold wind swept across the barren land, carrying with it the whispers of danger. Nova shivered, her hands scrambling to push herself up from the harsh ground. Her fingers brushed against the rough surface, and she winced as small cuts opened along her skin. She was in no condition to fight, no way to defend herself, but her instincts kicked in. She had to move. She had to get out of here. The planet wasn't just hostile, it was a living nightmare. The sky was filled with swirling clouds of dust, and in the distance, dark shapes shifted between the rocks, the kind of creatures she had only heard about in stories, things that hunted with no mercy. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. Why was she here? How had she ended up alone on this hellish world? And most importantly, who had left her to die? She stumbled forward, her feet barely finding their footing. She had no supplies, no weapons, only the clothes on her back and a growing sense of dread that she couldn't shake. Her heart pounded as the realization hit her. There was no rescue coming. She had been abandoned. For hours, Nova wandered aimlessly, trying to find shelter. The ground seemed to change with every step, as if the planet itself was shifting to keep her from ever finding peace. The terrain was jagged, with massive rocks towering over her like silent sentinels, watching her every move. But then, she saw something. In the distance, just beyond a range of twisted trees, something large moved. Nova froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't tell what it was, but it was unmistakably alive. She had no choice but to keep moving. As she climbed over the rocks, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. Her eyes darted back and forth, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. She had no idea what creatures roamed this place, but she knew that if she didn't keep moving, she wouldn't last long. And then she heard it, the sound of footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone or something was following her. Nova spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. There was nothing there, just the wind. She exhaled slowly, trying to calm herself. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her, but deep down she knew. The predator was out there, watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. Nova wasn't just stranded on a dangerous planet. She was being hunted, and this time she wasn't the one in control. The hunt begins. The silence of the planet was suffocating. Nova's every breath echoed in the still air, mixing with the eerie hum of distant thunder. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The ground beneath her feet seemed alive, shifting and groaning as she stepped carefully through the jagged terrain. Every step, every movement felt like a risk. She had made it through the first day, but Nova knew she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the world around her was filled with unseen dangers. She had no idea how long she could survive without food, water, or any form of shelter. But Nova was nothing if not determined. The few instincts she had left told her one thing: keep moving. The sky above was a twisted mess of red clouds, crackling with flashes of lightning. It seemed to close in on her, pressing down on her shoulders with an almost physical weight. She scanned the horizon, hoping for something, anything, that could give her a sense of direction. As she walked, the land became more treacherous. The cracks in the ground grew wider, and the air felt heavier. A strange buzzing sound filled the air, like a swarm of insects moving in unison. Nova flinched, the hairs on her neck standing up. Something was watching her, she could feel it. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath her. The buzzing grew louder, closer. She whirled around, but there was nothing there. Her heart raced as she strained her ears, trying to make sense of the noise. Then, she heard it, a growl, low and guttural, cutting through the air like a blade. It was so deep that it vibrated in her chest, sending a shiver of terror down her spine. Nova froze, her eyes widening in panic. The sound came from somewhere behind her. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as she slowly turned her head, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. And there it was. Emerging from the shadows of the jagged rocks, an enormous creature stepped into view. Its body was covered in dark iridescent scales shimmering under the faint light. It had the unmistakable shape of a predator, its sharp claws digging into the ground as it moved with deadly precision. Its eyes gleamed with an eerie, unnatural orange glow, locking onto Nova as it stalked closer. But it didn't charge. It didn't leap. It simply watched her, its head cocked as if studying her. The growl faded into a low rumble, and the predator's gaze never left her. Nova's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a creature she could outrun. It was no mere animal. It was something far more intelligent, something that had its own purpose. And it wasn't hunting her just to feed. For a brief moment, they locked eyes. And in that silence, Nova realized something terrifying. This creature wasn't here to kill her. Not yet. It was learning, watching, waiting for something. Her mind raced, but the predator didn't move. It was like an apex predator, accustomed to being in control. But for the first time, Nova felt something shift, a flicker of recognition, a sense of uneasy understanding. This beast, this hunter, was testing her, and whatever game it was playing, she was the prey. Nova took a hesitant step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The creature didn't react, just continued watching. Was it waiting for her to run, or was it waiting for something else? Suddenly the growl returned, but it wasn't a warning. It was a command. Nova's instincts screamed at her to run, but she held her ground. There was something different about this creature. It wasn't just a mindless beast. It was calculating. And it was waiting for the right moment to strike. A deadly encounter. The sunless sky was heavy with clouds, casting an eternal twilight over the barren land. Nova's pulse quickened with every step, her senses on high alert. The predator had not moved for what seemed like hours, but she could feel it. Its eyes still on her, watching from the shadows, studying her every move. The chilling thought that she was being tested gnawed at her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her every decision might be the difference between life and death. Nova pressed on, her feet growing weary, her mind spinning with questions. What did the creature want? Why hadn't it attacked yet? And what kind of planet was this, where every step seemed to drag her deeper into a twisted game of survival? As she wandered through the jagged rocks and dense blackened trees, she heard a rustle. It wasn't the wind. No. This sound was deliberate, purposeful. Nova froze. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she instinctively dropped to a crouch, blending into the shadows of the rocks. Her breathing slowed as she tried to calm herself. The rustling came again, closer now. Then a flash of movement caught her eye. A massive creature different from the predator darted out from behind a tree. It was sleek, with scales like armor, its eyes reflecting a blood-red hue. It had the build of a hunter, moving with the precision of something designed to kill. Without warning, it charged. Nova barely had time to react. She scrambled to her feet, adrenaline coursing through her veins. As she sprinted in the opposite direction, the ground trembled beneath her, the weight of the creature's pursuit shaking the very earth. It was fast, too fast, and its screeching growls echoed through the air as it gained on her. But she wasn't going down without a fight. She spotted a narrow crevice in the rocks just ahead. If she could make it there, she might have a chance to escape. Nova pushed herself harder, her body screaming in protest, but the creature was relentless. It was almost upon her, its claws slashing through the air. She could feel the hot breath on her neck, the sharp fangs just inches away from sinking into her flesh. At the last moment, she dove into the crevice, barely squeezing through the narrow opening. She sucked in a breath, her chest tight as she lay flat against the cold rock. The creature's growls echoed outside, its frustration palpable as it paced back and forth. Nova could hear it sniffing the air, trying to find where she had gone. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Nova's mind raced, her breath coming in short gasps. The creature was still out there, prowling, searching for her. She had to think. She had to survive. Suddenly, a low growl resonated from behind her. Nova's blood ran cold. The apex predator. It had arrived. It emerged from the shadows, its massive form silhouetted against the dim light. The two creatures locked eyes, each sizing the other up. The ground shook as they circled, the tension between them palpable. Nova barely dared to move, knowing that any wrong move could trigger a deadly confrontation. The predator seemed to hesitate. It wasn't attacking the new creature. Instead, it stood its ground, waiting, watching. It knew something she didn't. And then, in a shocking turn of events, the predator lunged, not at her but at the charging beast. With brutal force, it slammed into the creature, sending it sprawling to the ground. A violent primal battle unfolded before her eyes. Claws and teeth clashed, the two predators fighting for dominance. Nova was frozen, too terrified to breathe. She knew she couldn't stay here for long. The battle between the two beasts was escalating, and she had to find a way to escape before she became the real prey. As the chaos unfolded, Nova spotted an opening, a chance to slip away unnoticed. Her heart raced, but she knew this was her moment. She scrambled toward the narrow path, her breath heavy in her chest, her legs aching with exhaustion. The predators were locked in their brutal dance, their attention fully focused on each other. Nova moved quickly, her every step a calculated risk. If she made it out alive, she'd have to face the consequences of this deadly encounter. But for now, her only goal was to survive the hunt. The predator's secrets, Nova's escape from the deadly battle between the two creatures, had been narrow. The scent of blood hung in the air, mingling with the acrid metallic tang of the planet's atmosphere. Her heart hammered in her chest as she ducked behind a massive rock formation, hidden from sight. The world around her was eerily quiet now, the sounds of battle fading into the distance. For a moment she allowed herself a breath. But there was no time for relief. She was still stranded on a planet filled with dangers, and now she had more questions than ever. The predator, the one that had been following her since her first encounter, hadn't been trying to harm her. In fact, it had saved her life. But why? Why had it chosen to protect her instead of attacking? She couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that this wasn't mere instinct. Something more was going on. Nova's mind raced as she carefully peered around the rock, looking for any signs of movement. The predator was nowhere in sight, but she could still feel its presence, like an invisible force watching her from afar. It wasn't done with her yet. She had to find answers. With cautious steps, Nova moved deeper into the craggy landscape, her senses heightened. The terrain had changed again. This time it was more open, with patches of odd, twisted plants and strange rock formations that seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. It was unlike anything she had seen before. As she continued forward, her eyes caught something gleaming in the distance. A strange glow, pulsing gently like a beacon. Her curiosity piqued. Nova felt a pull toward it, an undeniable force guiding her steps. She didn't know why, but she had to see what it was. The closer she got, the more she felt the weight of the predator's presence, like it was tracking her every move. Was it leading her to this place? Or was it simply a silent observer, waiting to see what she would do? Finally, she reached the source of the glow. It was a massive, crystal-like structure buried deep in the earth. The crystal hummed softly, its surface smooth and iridescent, casting an eerie light across the surroundings. Nova reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing against its cool surface. The moment she touched it, a strange sensation ran through her, like an electric shock, but not painful. It was more like a connection, a bond. Suddenly, images flashed in her mind. brief, disjointed moments that didn't make sense. Shadows of creatures, ancient symbols, and an overwhelming sense of power. Then, a voice. It was a deep, guttural sound, but it was not in a language Nova recognized. The words felt ancient, as though they had been spoken long before her time, before the planet even existed. But somehow, she understood. The voice was speaking to her, and it was telling her one thing: she was not the first. The predator's behavior began to make sense. This planet was more than just a deadly landscape. It was a test, and she had been chosen for it. The predator, which had followed her, wasn't just a mindless beast. It was part of something much larger. It was guarding this ancient secret, ensuring that the trials continued. Nova's mind raced as the pieces started to fit together. The planet wasn't random. It had a purpose. She wasn't just a survivor here by chance. She was part of something bigger, something far older than anything she could understand. Before she could process everything, a low growl echoed from behind her. She turned slowly, her heart sinking. There, standing in the shadows, was the apex predator. It had been watching her just as it always had, but this time something had changed. It didn't approach. Instead, it stood still, its eyes glowing with an unfamiliar intensity. Nova realized the truth. It wasn't here to kill her. It was here to guide her. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a test, and she had just taken the first step toward understanding the planet's deadly purpose. But what would the rest of the trial be? Would she be able to survive the next challenge? And more importantly, would she be able to uncover the predator's secrets before it was too late? The connection deepens. Nova's pulse quickened as she watched the apex predator. Its glowing eyes were fixed on her, but there was no aggression in its stance. It stood motionless, as if waiting for her to make the next move. Something about its gaze had shifted, less predatory now, almost curious. It was as though the creature was no longer viewing her as prey. The thought sent a shiver through her spine. For the first time, she realized she wasn't the only one being tested. The predator was too, and now they were inextricably linked in this strange, brutal dance of survival. Nova hesitated, trying to decipher the meaning of the silent standoff. Her breath came in shallow bursts as the wind whipped through the jagged landscape. The crystal behind her pulsed softly, casting an eerie glow that seemed to intensify the silence. It was almost as if the planet itself was waiting, holding its breath for what would happen next. With a slow, deliberate motion, Nova took a step forward. She wasn't sure what she expected: an attack, a retreat, or something entirely different. But the predator didn't move. It didn't growl or show its teeth, the usual signals of aggression. Instead, it watched her closely, its head tilting slightly, as if it was trying to understand her. The connection was undeniable now. There was a strange sense of recognition between them. Something primal, something ancient. It was as if they both understood the same unspoken truth. Their fates were bound together on this hostile planet. Nova's mind raced. She had learned to survive, but the predator had been the one thing she couldn't figure out. Was it leading her, watching over her, or was it simply testing her? Could she trust it, or was it playing its own game, just as deadly as everything else on this forsaken world? She needed to know more. Turning her back to the creature, Nova studied the crystal once more, her fingers itching to touch its surface again. She could still feel the strange pulse, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The images had come to her so quickly, so fleetingly, but they held a key to something much larger. This planet wasn't just a place to be tested. It was a place of trials. Ancient trials meant to forge something stronger, something far beyond her. The crystal had felt like a link to that greater purpose, but she still didn't understand what the trials would bring. Was she being tested for something more than survival? For what exactly? The predator had been a part of that mystery, but it wasn't enough to grasp the full picture. Nova needed to understand the predator's role in all of this. As if sensing her thoughts, the apex predator stepped forward. its massive clawed feet pressed into the earth with quiet authority. It moved closer, its eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. But instead of attacking, it lowered its head slightly, as if to offer her a sign of trust. A growl rumbled deep within its chest, not one of menace but of communication. Nova took a cautious step toward it. The predator didn't pull back or lash out. It was almost as though it was inviting her to come closer. She hesitated for a moment, her mind screaming that this was too dangerous, that she couldn't trust the creature. But the nagging feeling that they were connected in some way pushed her forward. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed against its tough, armored skin, something strange happened. A jolt of energy ran through her. Not painful, but intense, as if the predator was somehow sharing its strength with her. The connection deepened, and in that moment, Nova knew. The predator wasn't just a guardian of the trials. It was a part of the planet's ancient system, a sentient being bound by forces beyond her understanding, and somehow it had chosen her to be its partner, its ally. But for what? What was it preparing her for? The answers were still out of reach, but Nova felt something stir deep within her. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was beginning to shift. There was something more to this. The predator wasn't just a monster to survive. It was a key to unlocking the truth of this deadly planet. And together, they would uncover it. But the question remained. Would the predator guide her to the heart of this mystery? Or would she find herself tangled in a web of deception and darkness, never knowing whether it was friend or foe? Betrayal and revelation. The air was thick with tension as Nova and the apex predator continued their silent journey across the deadly terrain. The unspoken bond between them had grown, but with it came a growing unease. The planet, it seemed, was always shifting, changing. It was as if it sensed the connection forming between her and the predator, and was not content to let that bond settle into something peaceful. Nova moved with a sense of urgency now. Every step felt like a countdown, each one taking her closer to some unavoidable truth. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the flashes of images she had seen at the crystal, visions of past survivors, strange markings, and a whispering voice that spoke of tests far older than her. What was she really a part of? Why had she been chosen? She didn't have time to contemplate for long. A sudden rustling in the underbrush broke her thoughts, and Nova instinctively spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. The predator was a few paces ahead, its head tilted toward the noise, but it made no move to attack. Instead, it seemed cautious, its body tense. And then, like a shadow slipping from the cracks in the world, they appeared. Survivors. At first, Nova thought she was imagining it, a hallucination brought on by the isolation of the planet. But as they emerged from the rocky cliffs, their outlines became clearer, solidifying into figures of human shape. They were dressed in weathered survival gear, their faces obscured by masks and hoods. But one thing was clear. They were not here to offer help. "Nova," a voice called out, and it froze her in place. The voice was too familiar, too jarring. It was his voice, the one she had trusted, the one who had abandoned her on this hellish planet. "David," she whispered, under her breath. Her body went cold. How had he found her? How could he be here, on this forsaken world? The group moved forward, and David stepped into the light, his face worn but unmistakable. His eyes flickered toward the apex predator, and there was something in his gaze, something calculated, something cold. "You shouldn't have made it this far," he said, his voice dripping with a mixture of disbelief and disdain. Nova's mind spun as she tried to process what was happening. David had left her behind, abandoned her to die, and now he was here, standing before her like a ghost from the past. Why? What was he doing here? And why did he look so different? There was no warmth in his eyes, only a calculating, distant emptiness. "You were never meant to survive," he continued, his words sending a chill through her veins. "You were a test subject, part of the experiment. But I guess you're tougher than I thought." Nova's heart sank as the truth hit her like a wave. This wasn't an accident. She hadn't been abandoned by mistake. She was part of some twisted experiment, a trial designed by the very people she had once trusted. David, her supposed ally, had been one of the architects of her torment. She turned to the apex predator, her eyes meeting its gaze. It wasn't just a protector. It had been watching her to ensure she passed the test, a test meant to push her beyond human limits. But why? Was she meant to be part of something larger than herself? David's eyes followed her gaze. "You think it's protecting you? Don't be naive," he sneered. "That creature doesn't care about you. It's part of the program, just like you." The words hung in the air, the weight of betrayal pressing down on Nova's chest. Everything she had believed, everything she had trusted was a lie. The predator had been no savior. It had been her silent overseer, watching as she was pushed to her breaking point. The trials were never meant to save her. They were meant to test her, to test how far she could go, how much she could endure until she eventually broke. But Nova refused to break. "I'm not part of your experiment," she said through gritted teeth. "I'm not your test subject." David's lips curled into a smirk. "You were always just a pawn. You and the others. We've been testing the limits of survival for years, and you. You failed the first test when you trusted me." Nova took a step back, her hand instinctively moving to the side of her waist, where she had tucked a shard of metal she had found earlier. She wasn't going down without a fight, no matter how much of a pawn she had become. The apex predator growled softly behind her, as if sensing the rising tension. It moved forward, its eyes fixed on David and his group, its body low and predatory. The humans didn't seem intimidated. They had known about the predator all along. David's gaze turned cold. "You think it's on your side? It's not. You're just a piece in this game, and you're about to lose." Nova's heart raced. She wasn't sure how she could possibly outsmart them, outlast them. The betrayal stung deeper than she expected, but now she knew the truth. She was the test, and she had to prove herself worthy. To herself, to the planet, and to the creature that had followed her all this time. With a determined breath, she squared her shoulders. "We'll see about that." The final stand. The silence that followed. David's words was deafening. Nova's chest tightened as she slowly turned to face him. The weight of his betrayal pressed down on her, but it was no longer fear that gripped her. It was resolve. The games they had played with her, the lies, the tests, the manipulation, were over. She had survived their trials, and now she would rewrite the rules. The apex predator stood beside her, its massive frame casting a long shadow across the rocky ground. The creature's eyes glowed with an intensity that mirrored Nova's own determination. It was no longer just a test for survival. It was a battle for everything they had endured, everything they had fought for. And this time, Nova wasn't just fighting for her life, she was fighting for control, for freedom. David's smug expression wavered as he took a step back, glancing at the others in his group. They seemed unsure, their confidence faltering. For the first time, they were the ones on edge. Nova could see the fear in their eyes, and she felt a surge of power. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated the predator. "You think you can stop me?" David sneered, reaching for a device on his belt. "This is your last chance to surrender. You're nothing but a test subject, and you will die like one." Nova's grip tightened around the shard of metal she had hidden in her hand. She wasn't going to surrender. Not to him, not to this planet, not to anyone. The predator growled lowly at David, its body coiling like a spring ready to release. Nova could see its muscles rippling beneath its sleek armor, ready to strike. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the promise of violence. David raised his hand, a signal to his group, and in that moment, Nova knew. They would try to overpower her. They would try to break her, but she wasn't alone anymore. The predator was hers as much as she was its, and together, they would fight back. She made her move. With one swift motion, she dashed forward, the shard of metal gleaming in her hand. The apex predator followed her, its movements fluid and precise. They were a force, a unit. The ground beneath their feet trembled as they charged. David's group hesitated, clearly not expecting this sudden burst of resistance. Nova used their moment of doubt to her advantage. She feinted to the left, drawing one of David's men out of position. With a quick strike, she disarmed him, knocking him to the ground. The predator lunged, its claws slashing through the air, its growl vibrating the very earth beneath them. David shouted in anger, his voice breaking the tension like a whip. "Get her now!" But it was too late. The predator was already in motion, its speed and strength overwhelming. It tore through David's team with ruthless efficiency, each strike precise and devastating. Nova moved with it, darting between the chaos, her eyes locked on David. He was the real enemy. He was the one who had caused all of this. David backed away, his face twisted in fear. "You don't know what you're doing. You'll never leave this planet, none of you will." But Nova's voice was steady, filled with the confidence of someone who had faced down death too many times to be afraid of threats. "I'm not leaving, I'm taking control." The apex predator turned to her, its eyes locking with hers. There was a moment of understanding between them, a silent agreement. It had helped her survive the trials, but this was her fight. This was her stand. And now, together, they would end it. David fumbled with his device, his hands shaking as he tried to activate some kind of weapon. But before he could react, the predator was upon him. It moved with a speed that was almost impossible to follow, its claws slicing through the air and its teeth bared. David screamed, but the predator didn't hesitate. It was over in an instant. Nova watched, her chest rising and falling with the rush of adrenaline. She could feel the weight of everything lifting off her shoulders. The betrayal, the uncertainty, the manipulation. It was all gone. This planet, this deadly place, had finally met its match. As the last of David's group fell, Nova stood tall, the predator at her side. The world around them was still. The chaos was over. But Nova knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She had survived their trials. But now, the true test was about to begin. A test of what came after survival. What would she do with the power she had won? What would she do with the freedom she had claimed? With a final glance at the predator, Nova nodded. They had fought together. And now they would face whatever came next, together. The planet's trials were over. But Nova's journey had only just begun.